Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode I'm going to be looking at this Hornby Ringfield Tender Drive King loco that's been sent to me by David, who says it could do with a service and it's not running too well. Getting it out of the box, it looks to be in quite good condition overall. A little bit dusty and there is a front buffer missing. Also the fireman has come adrift in transit, so we'll re-secure him. But looking over this model, like I said, it doesn't look to be in too bad a condition at all. The wheels are a little bit grubby, and those on the front pony truck there are actually coated in the black carbon deposits. So this model has got some mileage on it. This has been around the track a few times. So it will all need a thorough strip down as usual and a good clean up. The Ringfield Tender Drive model, we've looked at these plenty of times in the past, but I will go over it just in case you're the first time viewer of Trash to Track, who knows. So just dusting off a lot of the dust there. This is, like I said, it's quite a dusty model, so we will give it all a clean up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the track, give it a quick test to see if it's a runner. So I grab the battery, and there doesn't appear to be any life in it whatsoever actually. Now this is a brand new battery, so I know it's got full of charge, but the model's not picking up any power whatsoever, so we're going to have to crack this open and have a look inside. Now as usual, tender body shell gently unclips with finger pressure. The clips are all intact, which is nice to see. And it's a very similar Ringfield model to what we looked at the other week with that Princess that I did. Same principle applies with these. You have to remove this wire and then remove the weights, and then once the weights are removed you can then gently lever out the motor block. There's no screw underneath in this model. The floating centre axles wheels there have come off, and straight away, I mean, there's a bird's nest of fibres wrapped around that axle, so this is going to need a service. Like I said, this has got some miles on the clock, this model, so it's probably well overdue a decent service. So there's quite a bit of fluff and dust in here, so I'm just going to dust all that away. Lubrication wise, the cogs are quite greasy, but it's not overly bad, not as bad as I've seen in the past. So I'm going to remove the cogs. You gently remove this brass clip here, just prise it off those two lugs, and that releases the clip. I'm going to remove that, and then the cogs come off. The larger cogs, which have a cast-in smaller cog underneath, and then these smaller ones that provide power to the wheels, these are all removed, and I'll give this motor block a good clean. Now turning my attention to the front, I'm just going to gently lift up the brush retainers to release the springs. Undo this wire as well, that allows me to remove the motor faceplate. Now the springs on this model came out easily enough, but the brushes were stuck in the apertures there, which isn't unusual. They do get stuck over time. They're congealed grease and carbon deposits, but they won't come out, so we're going to have to take the faceplate off, and then that reveals the commutator, which is very, very dirty. There is a lot of dirt on that. So I've got some contact cleaner in the tub here, and I'm just going to poke the brushes into the contact cleaner along with the springs, and I'll leave them to soak just to get any grease and oil off them. And then using a cotton bud of methylated spirits, I'm going to clean the motor faceplate, and you can see there just how much dirt has come off this already. This is just from use. It's old lubrication and carbon off the brushes. The gears were then given a quick wipe over with this blue cloth to remove any excess oil and grease off these. All the teeth on the gears are in good condition. There's no visible damage or scoring on them, so these can be refitted no problem. And after the majority of the dirt was wiped off, I then give them a quick clean with a cotton bud and meths as usual. Now you've seen me do this hundreds of times in the past. I'm going to clean the commutator first by removing most of that dirt with a cotton bud of methylated spirits, and then I'm going to use the fiberglass pencil just to burnish it a little bit, as there was some some marks in the copper there that would not come off. So this was then given a gentle polish up, and then a cocktail stick was used to clean the gaps out. These were quite full as well of carbon deposits. I've had people in the past comment and ask why I clean these out. I clean them out because a build-up of carbon can bridge those pieces. It can lead to overheating motors, poor running and general. It can lead to short circuits if you're not careful. I've also had people ask why I use methylated spirits as a cleaner. I've always used meths. I don't know why. It evaporates very fast. So once you've cleaned surfaces, it's gone within a matter of minutes. And it does a great job of removing grease and congealed oil. Now I've removed the wheels, we've found yet another 4mm scale bird's nest. More fibres wrapped around the axles. This was all inside this cog on the drive wheel here, so that was all removed with a toothpick. And then the axles and wheel backs were all cleaned, again with a cotton bud and meths. And so was the motor block. It's quite dirty, but it's only road dirt, as I'll say. It's dirt from this model having been used a lot in the past. So the axles were, like I said, the axles and wheel backs were all given a clean. And then once I was satisfied that all the grime had gone, I will start to rebuild this ring-filled motor. So one thing I did do with this model, I got the old toothbrush just to get in there, because there was a lot of fibres in there that wouldn't come out. They were quite stubborn. So using this old toothbrush managed to pull them out. So now I'm going to start reassembly. I'm going to use a very small amount of silicone grease on these spindles. Now I have seen people online say that you don't need to grease these because plastic doesn't need grease. Well, I disagree with that, because I have serviced ring-filled motors where the metal has worn down through friction with the plastic, and I've also seen other people service ring-filled motors that where the plastic's worn away. So you do need some sort of lubrication on those spindles for the gears. And then once that's in place, that brass clip, which has been cleaned, is replaced and holds everything in. The brushes and motor faceplate are all on, and you can see now that with battery power that motor is spinning nice and strongly. I didn't film the reassembly of the motor because, like I said, you've seen me do it a lot of times in the past. So now a small amount of oil is put on those brass axle bearings, and then the wheels are pushed back on into place. They are then checked for back-to-back measurements using my digital calipers. The tender frame was, again, just dusty, really nothing wrong with it, just very dirty and dusty from years of use and storage. So once that was all cleaned up, the motor is then replaced, not forgetting to put those axles on. And here you can see I've actually forgot to put the floating axle in, so I had to then take the motor faceplate off again and rebuild it properly. And then the motor clips in place and make sure it's orientated correctly. The clips have a larger and a smaller one, so you have to make sure they go in correctly. And then once all the wires are reattached, a battery across the tender pickup terminal and the pickup wheel shows you there that it's working. So the motor now is fully working, having been fully cleaned. And one of the last jobs is to screw these tender weights back in place. When I can find my screwdriver, that is. So screwing the tender weights back in place, we can now turn our attention to the locomotive part of the model. Now, to remove the chassis on this, you have to remove the screw under the smoke box, as is common with these tender drive models. And once the screw's been released, there is a clip underneath the cab that disengages, allowing you access into here. Although there's not much in here really, it is just extremely dusty, so it's going to need a good thorough clean. You can see the amount of dust there. And there's also fibres wrapped around the crank pins, so I'm going to remove the side rods and piston rods just to give it a thorough clean. There's no point in cleaning the motor if you're going to leave the locomotive section dirty. So I remove them on both sides, and then we will have a look at removing the base keeper plate and having a look at what sort of state the wheels and axles are on in this. So now that's all removed, we jump now to removing the base keeper, which is held on by a couple of clips. So you have to gently prise these off with a small flat bladed screwdriver. And also that chassis keeper holds the front pony in place. So you have to work gently here, just prising it gently, because the last thing you want to do is snap anything, otherwise you have to buy a new one. Pleasantly surprised to see it sitting in correct bearings in the die-cast chassis block. And I removed the wheels and I'm going to give this a thorough cleaning. Again, like the tender, it's not overly dirty, it is just grease and dust. So with the toothbrush I'm going to brush out all the dust out of the spokes in the wheels. The axles were then given a clean with a cotton bud of mess to remove any remnants of congealed jellified oil that's on them. I'd imagine that the lubrication on this is that was applied in the factory many years ago. Now looking at this model, it's probably from the late 80s, early 90s. And once all the axles and axle holes were cleaned, the bearings are lined up with the aid of the screwdriver there, and the wheels just fall back in place. Now these wheels are handed, they need to go in the correct way round to make sure that the insulated side is where it should be. And once all that old congealed oil had been removed and cleaned off, the axle holes were cleaned off and the wheels refitted, I then re-lubricated the axles using a Fleischmann oil pin dropper, just to add a small amount of lubricating oil to the axles. And once this was done, all three of these wheels are extremely free running, just as they should be. So now it's time to start reassembling this chassis piece, and I start by putting the base keeper plate on, although I make another mistake here, as you'll probably notice. I clip all this back in place and refit the side rod bars into it, but I've not put the front pony truck back in, as this holds that in place as well, as I mentioned earlier. So I will realise my mistake shortly and I'll have to loosen this keeper plate off again. But once that's in and these slide bar connectors are back where they should be, we will turn our attention to the wayward front pony truck that shouldn't be out of the model, but it is, and we'll give this a clean up. Now I start by getting my old paintbrush and dusting all the dust and fibres off it. And then using a toothpick, I'm going to scrape away most of that black carbon deposit that is built up on the wheel rims. It seems that when the model was running, these four wheels on the front here have picked up the majority of the dirt. And once that's done, I polish the wheel treads with a cotton bud of mess, loosen that keeper plate again and clip it back into place where it should be. And now I'm going to clean the actual loco wheels themselves, as they're easier to rotate when they're in the chassis like this than trying to clean them when they're out the chassis. Now there is some wear on these wheels, but they're not overly dirty. Those front pony wheels appear to have picked up the majority of the dirt when this model has been running around David's layout. Now I mentioned it a few videos ago in that prairie tank that I did, but the Great Western valve gear is very simple to work on. It's just the side rod and the piston rod, associated washer and crank pin. It is a lot more simpler than valve gear on say a Princess or a standard class loco. It's a pleasure to work with. It's not as head scratching, and it's very difficult to get things in the wrong way. So valve gear was replated on the other side, so everything is now back as it should be, all clean and free running. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tiny amount of oil to the crank pins themselves, as these are metal parts rotating in a plastic housing and they do wear away. I did a loco for somebody the other week and the actual crank pin holes had wound up being oval. To replace the loco chassis onto the body, it's a case of engaging that clip under the cab, refitting the screw which is hiding under the tender body there. Again, don't over tighten your screws, especially ones that go through chassis into plastic bodies, as the metal housings in the plastic are known to crack over time and you'll end up destroying them if you're not careful. Tender body shell now clips back on. As all the clips are there, this goes on very nicely. And then the rear coupling hook, which was slightly bent, is straightened with my tweezer nose pliers. And then inverting the tender, one of the last jobs to do is to clean the tender wheels, which I didn't do earlier on. Now just putting that battery across the terminal from the tender drawbar to the pickup wheel. The wheels were first given a polish with the cotton bud and meths, then they were polished properly with the fiberglass pencil, as these tender wheels were quite dirty. And for this I actually connected it up to the leads from the controller to give it more oomph and get the wheels spinning quicker. But once they were cleaned, I put the Loco back onto the test track to give it a battery test. And as you'll see here, David's King is now running under battery power, whereas before it wouldn't run at all. So it was just a case of needing a service and having built up a layer of dirt over its many years of use. One of the last jobs to do is to refit the fireman that had come adrift in transit. And we'll take a look at this King now in its entirety. Now it's not a bad model. It's still missing its front buffer there, so I will replace that shortly. But it is now starting to show its age, but it is an excellent budget model. And as it's a tender drive Ringfield, it will pull anything you put behind it. Now James's layout is no more, as I said the other day, so it's back onto the dining room table to give David's King a spin round with some coaches to make sure all is running correctly before I box it up and send it back to him. So it's a really strong and powerful runner, this model, and it's also very quiet for a Ringfield drive. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see featured in a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com and we'll have a look at getting it sent over, and it may even feature in an episode all of its own. Thank you for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.